are times when I confess, when I share my job title, which has both user experience in it and analytics in it, that I get a few quizzical looks. And I think that has a lot to do with the, shall we say, complicated relationship between data and design. So what do I mean by that? I mean, when I talk about data, first of all, in general here, I'm talking about all the types of research that we do, surveys and interviews and focus group research. When I talk about testing is in as part of data as well, so usability testing, A/B testing, analytics, of course, is part of data. We are surrounded by this world of data. We are buried in it, to be honest, right? There's just so much. And the relationship between UX and design, both within NPR and also within previous organizations that I've worked with, both on the inside and as a consultant, I've noticed a wide scale of relationships between data and design. Sometimes within a company, data and design feel like they have this kind of relationship. It's mutually respectful, it's loving, it's enjoyable, they support each other's decision makings, there's no judgment, there's just kindness, and then there's just, in its heart, adorable cuteness between the world of data analysts and designers. Unfortunately, I have not seen this in every organization that I've worked with in my past. More often than that, I've seen the relationship between data and design like this. It's like, design, data, I had this great idea. Design, data, why did you have to do that? Data, we were getting along so well. There's something about data which feels like it's a mugger. It's mugging us of our creativity, it's putting constraints on us, it puts shackles on who we are, it comes along and stomps on our great, fantastic design ideas with data that's often wrong or incomplete or just feels unfair. But for one reason or another, we feel like data is holding us back. And that's part of what I want to talk about is, why does that happen? How does that happen? And what can we do about it? So I want to talk about first 3 traps, pitfalls that I see happening within organizations when data and design go horribly, horribly wrong. The first trap, the first thing I see happening within a lot of organizations is that we think that we should design by blindly following data. As many of you probably live as well, research is not about doing things that people tell you to do. It's not about going out to your audience and saying, how would you like that to work? And listening and then designing it exactly that way. That's not why we do research. And yet, a lot of companies treat research that way, like it's some kind of prescription or driving directions or recipe that will tell us exactly what to do in what order. The problem, of course, with this is we fall into so many traps. The most famous example of that I like is when Sony was rolling out the boombox. Everybody who's old enough to remember the boombox, embarrassingly raise your hand at this moment. So when Sony was rolling out the boombox, this was the first time that you really had portable music. Well, sort of portable. And when they rolled this out, one of the things they did throughout the process was hold focus groups with prospective customers. So they grabbed a bunch of people in the room and they got feedback on a very important decision for them from a product point of view, which was, what color should it be? So they got everybody together and said, we have narrowed it down, we, Sony, to 2 colors. We think it's going to either be black or yellow when we roll this new product out. We want your feedback. So the focus group talked and went back and forth, what are the right options? They unanimously decided and recommended that Sony launch this in yellow. Because to them, this was a completely new category. And they thought that in order for Sony to grab enough attention in the market, this should stand out. They should make a bold statement. Sony said, thank you for your awesome feedback, very helpful. Here's your payment for being in our focus group. And also, special gift, on your way out, we'd like you to have a free early boombox. Fantastic, right? So they get up and they go out and they're walking out. And as they walk out of the room, there's 2 piles of boomboxes. There's a black pile and there's a yellow pile. Every single person took a black boombox. Fascinating, right? And it just goes to show that when we look at research, testing, analytics, all this data, unless you know how to use it carefully, unless you realize that one data point that you see does not always represent reality, that people don't always know what they really need, they're not always good descriptors of that, you fall into the first trap. The second trap is we measure the wrong thing, that we may be fans of data and looking at data, but we end up looking at actually the wrong stuff, the wrong measurements, or maybe we pick the wrong measurement to begin with. This one happens all the time. It's really important that we recognize that when we choose what is success, when we choose, and it is a choice, what we are going to measure to evaluate the success of a product or initiative or whatever, that decision of choice makes a huge difference on what we do. I mean, the logic of this and the sociology of this is really clear. Whatever you choose to measure ends up what you reward your staff by, right? And we've all been there. You get rewarded for the things that you can count and the things that the layers above you have chosen to be the most important KPIs. That gets rewarded. Whatever we reward then changes and really transforms who we are, what we do, what our culture becomes. This happens over and over in organizations. My favorite story of this comes from the Soviet Union a few decades ago. So glass factories in the Soviet Union, the powers that be were disappointed in the amount of glass that was being produced. So they decided, we are going to change how we reward our factories, and we are going to reward them based on the tonnage of glass that they produce. This went out, factories started changing the way they did things and built. What happened was quite interesting. They ended up producing super thick, heavy glass because it was the fastest way for them to get to tonnage. Okay, well, that's kind of a problem because you couldn't really see through it anymore. So the powers that be said, okay, wrong measurement. So instead, we are now going to measure you by square meters of glass you produced. Aha, so they thought they had a new metric. Well, guess what happened? The glass that was produced became so thin and brittle that effectively was worthless. All had to be thrown away. So what does this tell us? I mean, just that one measurement that they chose made all the difference in the success of that particular factory and that particular organization. I mean, that simple choice makes a big difference. And if you choose the wrong metric, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure right at the start. And finally, trap number 3 is that our creative selves, become mere machinists or optimizers instead of designing. That we become twiddlers of tiny little knobs and dials rather than making the big creative impact than we can. We become tenders of the machines and the robots that make all the big decisions, and we are just kind of putting in inputs into our regular A/B testing. And A/B testing is where this trap happens the most often. And I want to talk about what I see as the cult of A/B testing. There we go. So one of the things about A/B testing, and this is true for usability testing as well, but when you rely on one technique for making all of your decisions for you, dangerous things can happen. So when I see this on A/B testing a lot, even within NPR, it's very easy to fall into this trap. When you're looking at something like A/B testing, and you're rolling out an app, for example, and you want to try to get increases in conversion rate, and every time you make an improvement, test something different, you get a little bit closer, a little bit higher, it looks really good, you're making progress along the way. It feels right. And that's why we keep doing it as companies. But here's what you don't know, is in many cases, there is actually a local maximum that exists. So you can keep optimizing and keep getting closer and closer, but the fact is there's a natural limit to how good you're going to become in the space that you're currently playing with. And maybe you'll get to really great satisfaction if you keep optimizing that little by little improvements. But the only way to make a leap into something that is truly delightful is to escape and try to test something or try something completely different, way outside of the comfort zone, that maybe takes the product into a completely different direction that no one had thought about before. And this requires major risk, obviously, because instead of just testing small variations of our shopping cart page, we are now going to test something very different and start from scratch, if you will, and give a new approach a shot to see if at times it can go even higher. The cult of A/B testing is an unwillingness to take leaps, to assume that the data will always drive every decision and that human instinct and expertise and creativity basically are now thrown out the window. This is a trap that is very easy to fall into. Okay, so Mulder, what does work? Let's talk about what does work. There are some mantras that we have begun to live by at NPR that I wanted to share. that are, not surprisingly, the flip sides of what we just saw. The first is this. The first is data is not this prison that surrounds us, that kind of constrains our thinking and keeps us limited with decisions we want to make. I really think of it as a platform that we jump from. I think of it as concrete steps that are built on research and data and analytics and testing that we do, and standing on top of all those findings gives us a really firm ground from which to leap and imagine and go crazy. That if we didn't have the source of all that data underneath us, you can't really jump very high from squishy mud. You need a solid surface, and that's what data can provide, is the chance to actually leap out and think in new directions. So we're not trapped by data, but we are jumping from something solid. So at NPR, we have a ton of data, right? All of us within our organizations are exposed to a ridiculous amount of data. At NPR, we have a lot of ratings data, right? Radio ratings, digital ratings. Oh man, there's a crazy amount of metrics out there that we deal with all the time. There's third-party research about what people are listening to and what channels they're using for news and blah, 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 blah. There's channels and understanding how people are using all these different channels for listening and reading and consuming all of our content. All of these things are challenges for us. They're opportunities because we can reach new audience, so we're aware, we're following all this stuff. We do our own research, we develop personas and ongoing, figure out ways to integrate those into our processes and into our product thinking as well. All of this is great data. None of this tells us what to do. None of this gives us a prescription for acting. That is up to us. I mean, if we just did what the data said, we would end up with this kind of ridiculous nonsense. The famous Henry Ford thing, right? Where he asked what people want. If he asked what people wanted, they would have said a faster horse, not a car. It's up to us to listen to the unstated needs and behaviors and motivators and use those to actually spark new ideas. So we're not building things that people know to ask for. We're trying to meet them and build new things. So we meet them where they are. So we've been working on a while now for an app that syncs in your car. It syncs with the Ford Sync and other car manufacturers as well. And when the app syncs with your car, it gives an interface that's optimized, obviously, for that environment, voice activation. There's all that built into it, because we know that our audience is in cars quite a bit. So we want to be there with a new interface and a new experience in a place that's familiar. That's one way we use data. In a way that's familiar, but new and more than many of our listeners would expect. We're also doing a lot of experiments in some new spaces. So has anyone tried the NPR One app? It just came out. We have a soft launched it a couple of months ago. Fantastic. I love you particularly much. And so with NPR One, this is really one of our newer experiments in listening and what the future of digital listening can be when we're getting away from a live stream, which is what we're typically accustomed to on the radio, to something a little more customized and tailored. So think Pandora, but not quite, because it's far more curated than Pandora is. So when you come into the app, effectively, you are localized to a station, and you get the latest hourly newscast, and that plays. You get the latest local newscast. You can skip ahead if you want. You can rewind or do whatever you want to with it. You can share it. And then you get a running tally of stories that you might be interested in, and this is tailored based on what you listen to and what you like, but it's also at least half as much as curated, so we have an editorially curated experience and not just purely by algorithms. And that, again, backs up our thoughts of what comes out of data is not the most creative solution and the best answer. What comes out of the human mind, supported by data, can often lead to the best solution. So, and you can peek ahead, and it's basically a continuous listening experience like Pandora is, but curated with local public radio content and NPR content. And all of this is really about exploring experiences like this that meet user needs, but also the needs that users can't even quite articulate yet. They don't necessarily know they want this, but based on behaviors we were seeing, based on what we're hearing from them, there are needs that this fulfills that we think this could be a good match. And it's an experiment, and we're going to see how it goes. So this is our leap based on data but not necessarily driven by data alone. Mantra number 2, the rule of thumb for us, is that data helps us know how high we've jumped. When we do this kind of experiment or other products that we build, it's really critical for us to know, is it working? And find that out soon. And also find out, should we keep investing in this thing or not? Should we double down or not? That's a key question to know early on. And man, data is the right way to find that out. So a quick example of this. I work mostly for a part of NPR that creates products and services and consulting for public radio stations around the country. So basically, this was a project that we experimented with. First, very low tech. The idea was very simple. It was, NPR's main Facebook feed reaches millions of people. The typical public radio station feed doesn't reach near as much. Even when you adjust for within their market, it's still really quite small. So how do we expose more NPR listeners to the content from their local public radio station? So we thought, well, what if we started putting local public station content on NPR's Facebook page, but we geo-targeted it just for that particular audience in that market? So if it's a KPLU story, then it gets geo-targeted on NPR's national Facebook page, but just people in Seattle see it. So we thought, okay, let's try this. Let's try it with a couple of stations. We'll do it manually, even though it's going to be kind of a pain, but let's see if it works. So we put some local posts out there just for those Seattle visitors and measured. And lo and behold, we found that the engagement rate for those particular posts that were local were just skyrocketing compared to some of the national stories. And the longer we looked, the more clear that this advantage was. When you look at likes and comments and shares, they were all through the roof when you looked at the average local post versus the average national post. So we were like, okay, well, that's a quick enough experiment. That's all I need to know. Let's double down on this. We measured how high we can go. We measured it's clear that we need to reinvest in this. Let's leap and go to the next step. So we built this tool. This is a tool for stations to submit story ideas to NPR. And basically, there's a workflow process within the app where NPR editors can work with the stations to polish a piece or work on a headline or generally select and control the workflow for when it gets published, and they can publish it right from within this app. So this was all about scaling that quick experiment in a way that we could double down and actually grow this thing. So it's a quick example, but it's something that for us was really critical because we're a small team working for 300 stations around the country. And like all of us, we have limited resources and time. We need to know how to invest that time as effectively as possible. And then finally, the third thing I'll talk about with a mantra that we live by, and this is a key mindset. We think about projects even in this world of lean and even in this world of agile and iterative processes. We think about achieving goals and achieving milestones, finishing products, launching websites, launching apps. And we use the language of finishing. We still use it a lot, right, when we talk about projects, wrapping up. This has been transformative within NPR, this thinking, this changing of mindset as it's never about being done. There is no done. It's about continuous learning. It's about getting on this great spiral staircase where you just keep going and keep learning and keep getting better. So does this sound like lean startup thinking? Yes, it does. Jonathan talked about this earlier, so I won't rehash this. But we use this thinking as well, especially on the NPR One app that I mentioned. It's a great way for us to start making assumptions, build a hypothesis, and figure out what is the simplest way we could build something to test that idea. And then test it, get the numbers back, learn from that, and create new ideas, and just keep growing and growing our body of knowledge. So with NPR One, this app that I mentioned, which you should clearly download, one of the decisions we've had to make along the way is how to design choice, the power of choice, in a somewhat passive listening environment. And what I mean by that is typically when you're listening to a story, you can, if you want to, swipe ahead and see more options. So the original design was let's give users more choice, and when they swipe forward, they can see what's coming next, and they can make a choice actively. And if they don't, that's okay. We'll just pick one for them, and it'll continue to play. So a few of us had a hypothesis about this. Having read The Power of the Paradox of Choice and understanding how real users behave in the wild, we thought, what if fewer immediate choices and more simplicity actually would work better and get us to longer listening. So we designed an alternative, which was when you swipe forward, you see one thing, one card, one story. You can choose to accept that. You could keep going if you want to, but the impression is you're just looking ahead in what's next on your little radio, your personal radio. So we tested it. We did an A/B test, threw it out there, and lo and behold, the simpler option showed an increase in listening time. Now, was this a no-brainer? Not necessarily. This didn't actually lock down what we were going to do. The data informed our decision making. The data did not make our decision for us. But without the data, we would have just been guessing. And more recently, we did a usability test on the content management system that we provide for about 150 stations right now that use this for publishing their website. And we were doing a responsive redesign and testing the infamous hamburger nav, which many of you probably play with and have heard about. So we did a couple of rounds of usability testing on this as well. And it was really valuable to see people using this. But as we were going through this work, it really reminded us again, when you see these tests, when you see these results in usability testing, never feel constrained by what you're learning. Bring it in as an input into your decision making, but not your entire decision. This kind of testing helps us answer the question ourselves that is ours to answer, not the machine's to answer. So wrapping up, the key to the question for me is, why is this so hard? It just seems like walking the narrow path of data and design is so much harder in real life than it seems to be on paper or in PowerPoint. On the one side, it's so easy to fall off the cliff into the cult of A/B testing and get so wrapped up in data making every single decision that you get locked into that local maximum. On the other side, though, it's so tempting to just ignore data completely in what I call the cult of ego, where we think we know it all without ever using data. For some reason, within organizations, and that includes NPR, it's very hard to balance that middle path and walk up higher. Shout out to Angel's Landing hike in Zion National Park. Just unbelievable if you ever get there and you have legs and if you don't want legs the next day, you might want to not go on this hike, but highly recommended. So I leave you with our dear friends here. And the way I would wrap this up is basically to say that for me, fundamentally, data is not about providing the answer. What it does best is help us ask better questions, is help us understand where on the journey to go. It's not the key that unlocks what we should do, but it is the key that helps us to ask better questions that get us from satisfaction up higher to delight, and hopefully a good massage as well. Thank you.